Hey everyone, tonight we begin with something that'll shatter every Hollywood fantasy you've ever had about medieval royalty. We're talking about what it was actually like to wake up as a real medieval king's, not the sanitized, crown-wearing hero of your favorite TV show, but the genuine article dealing with genuine medieval problems that would make your worst Monday morning feel like a spa day. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You wake up before dawn in your royal bedchamber, and the first thing that hits you isn't the majesty of kingship. It's the cold. The stone walls of your castle are basically refrigerators with windows, and despite the tapestries hanging everywhere, trying to trap whatever heat your fireplace managed to generate overnight, you can see your breath in the air. The fire has died down to embers, and your servants haven't arrived yet to stoke it back to life, because, surprise, even kings can't just snap their fingers and make people materialize. Medieval logistics don't work that way. You're lying in what passes for a royal bed, which sounds impressive until you realize it's basically a wooden frame with rope stretched across it, topped with a straw mattress that's seen better decades. The sheets are linen if you're lucky, and they're probably damp from the humidity that permeates every stone building in this era. Your pillow is stuffed with feathers, sure, but feathers that haven't been properly cleaned and still carry the distinct aroma of the birds they came from. You shift positions and hear the straw crackle beneath you, a sound that'll become as familiar as your own heartbeat. The first decision of your royal day isn't about matters of state or grand policy. It's whether to get up and pee in the chamber pot that's been sitting in the corner all night, contributing its own special perfume to the room's atmosphere, or to hold it and hope your bladder can wait until someone brings you something resembling privacy. Medieval castles weren't exactly designed with bathroom convenience in mind, and even kings had to make do with basically a fancy bucket that some poor servant would have to empty later. As you finally force yourself out of bed, your feet hit the floor and immediately remind you that stone doesn't care about your royal status. It's still cold enough to make you dance from foot to foot like you're walking on ice. The rushes scattered across the floor provide minimal insulation and maximum opportunity to step on something unpleasant that got dropped there yesterday, or last week, or possibly last month. Because medieval housekeeping operated on a very different schedule than what you're used to. Your first visitor of the day isn't a noble advisor or a messenger bearing important news. It's your groom of the stool, whose job title sounds quaint until you realize he's literally in charge of your bathroom activities. This is actually a position of enormous privilege and access, because in the medieval world, the person who gets to hang around while you're at your most vulnerable is someone you absolutely have to trust. He's followed by your chamberlain, your body servants, and a parade of people whose entire existence revolves around the fact that you can't dress yourself without help. And you really can't dress yourself, because royal clothing in the medieval period was basically designed by someone who assumed you'd have a team of assistants. Your undergarments alone require coordination. There's a linen shirt that goes on first, then hose that need to be tied up properly, or you'll spend your day hiking them back up like a medieval version of sagging pants. Over this goes a tunic, then possibly another tunic depending on the weather and how much you need to impress people today, then a surcoat if you're feeling fancy, and finally your outer garments, which might include a cloak that weighs more than most people's entire wardrobes. Each piece of clothing requires someone else's hands to fasten, tie, or adjust properly. The buttons haven't been invented yet, so everything is laced, pinned, or tied with drawstrings that seem to have a mind of their own. Your servants have to dress you like you're a very expensive, very complicated doll, and if they mess up the order of operations, you're stuck standing there half-dressed while they figure out how to fix whatever they've done wrong. While you're being dressed, you're also being briefed on the day's activities by your chamberlain, who's basically your medieval personal assistant, crossed with a security chief. He's telling you about the petitioners who've been waiting to see you, some of them for days or weeks, because medieval travel doesn't happen quickly, and people don't just drop by the castle on a whim. There are disputes to settle, decisions to make, letters to dictate, and a dozen other administrative tasks that make being king feel less like ruling with an iron fist and more like being the world's most important middle manager. Your breakfast, when it finally arrives, is a reminder that medieval royal cuisine was more about showing off than tasting good. There's meat, probably pork or beef, that's been cooked until it's safe to eat, which in this era means cooked until it's basically leather. There's bread that's actually decent, if you're lucky enough to have good bakers in your service, but it's still made with flour that contains a non-zero amount of ground-up stone from the mill wheels, giving it a gritty texture that'll wear down your teeth over time. The ale or wine you're drinking with breakfast isn't because medieval people were alcoholics, it's because the water might literally kill you, and fermented beverages are the safest option available. As you eat, you're constantly surrounded by people. Privacy is a luxury that doesn't really exist for medieval kings, because your safety depends on having witnesses to everything you do. Every meal, every conversation, every decision is observed by someone, partly for security and partly because that's how medieval politics work. If you want to have a private conversation, you have to plan for it, like a military operation, because spontaneous privacy isn't really an option. After breakfast comes the morning court session, where you get to hear petitions and settle disputes. This sounds dignified until you realise that medieval legal problems are often incredibly petty and frustrating. Someone's pig got loose and ate someone else's crops. Two villages are fighting over water rights to a stream. A merchant claims he was cheated in a trade deal, but the other party swears he delivered exactly what was promised. These aren't the grand matters of state you see in movies. They're the medieval equivalent of neighbour disputes that somehow require royal intervention because there's no other authority figure available to sort things out. You sit on your throne, which is probably made of wood and definitely not as comfortable as it looks, listening to people argue about problems that seem simultaneously trivial and desperately important to the people involved. Your job is to make decisions that will affect real people's lives, but you're making them based on incomplete information, contradictory testimony, and legal traditions that might not make sense in the current situation. There's no appeals court, no higher authority to pass the buck to me, or your decision is final, and everyone knows it. The first case today involves a baker who's been accused of selling bread that's underweight. The guild representative is there with a set of standard weights, and sure enough, the baker's loaves are coming up short. But the baker swears he's using the same recipe and methods he's always used, and his customers are defending him because his bread actually tastes better than most. You have to figure out whether this is deliberate fraud or an honest mistake, and your decision will either destroy a man's livelihood or potentially let a cheat continue operating. There's no middle ground, no suspended sentence. Medieval justice doesn't work that way. The next petitioner is a widow whose late husband's brother is trying to claim her property, arguing that women can't inherit land in their family line. She's got documents that say otherwise, but he's got the local priest backing him up, claiming that letting women own property goes against God's will. You know perfectly well that this is more about the brother wanting the property than about theological principles, but you also know that your decision will set a precedent that other women in your kingdom will either benefit from or suffer under. The legal implications stretch far beyond this one case, and everyone in the room knows it. Between court sessions, you deal with the administrative side of kingship, which is basically medieval paperwork. Letters need to be dictated to scribes because you might not be able to write, and even if you can, writing is slow and your time is valuable. Every letter has to be carefully composed because there's no way to unsend it once your messenger rides off, and diplomatic mistakes can literally start wars. You're dealing with reports from your various holdings, tax collection updates, military intelligence, and a constant stream of requests for royal favour, royal intervention, or royal money. Today's correspondence includes a letter from your cousin, who rules the neighbouring kingdom, and reading between the lines, you can tell he's fishing for information about your military strength while trying to seem friendly and familial. There's a report from your tax collectors in the northern provinces that suggests either the harvest was worse than expected or someone's skimming more than their fair share. Your spy master has sent a coded message about troop movements in a rival kingdom that might mean they're planning an invasion or might just mean they're dealing with bandits on their own borders. The castle around you is a constant hive of activity that you can't escape. There are servants everywhere, but they're not invisible. They're people with their own personalities, problems, and agendas. Your cook might be brilliant at managing the kitchen, but he's also skimming a little off the top of the food budget, and everyone knows it. Your head groom knows more about horses than anyone in the kingdom, but he also has opinions about your riding style that he's not shy about sharing. Your guards are loyal, but they're also gossipy, and anything you say or do will be discussed in the guardhouse later. The castle's daily routine continues around you, whether you participate or not. The kitchen staff are already preparing the evening meal, which means the entire castle smells like cooking meat, wood smoke, and whatever herbs the cooks are using to mask the flavours of ingredients that might be past their prime. The armourer is working on repairs to weapons and equipment, the rhythmic hammering providing a constant background soundtrack. The stable hands attending to dozens of horses that eat better than most peasants and generate enough manure to fertilise a small farm. Lunchtime brings another elaborate meal that's more about political theatre than nutrition. If you have guests, everything about the meal sends messages: where people sit, what they're served, which servants attend them. Medieval dining is basically edible diplomacy, and every choice you make is being analysed by everyone present. The food itself is heavily spiced, not because medieval people loved exotic flavours, but because spices were expensive, and showing off your ability to afford them was the whole point. The meat might be peacock or swan, impressive birds that taste considerably worse than they look, but demonstrate your wealth and status. Today you're dining with a delegation of merchants who want exclusive trading rights through your territory. They've brought gifts, malts of silk, exotic spices, and silverwork that's clearly designed to soften you up for negotiations. You have to appear gracious and interested in their gifts, while mentally calculating how much these trading rights are actually worth, and whether granting them might anger other merchant groups who are already paying you taxes and fees. Every bite of food is accompanied by careful conversation that's really economic warfare disguised as pleasantries. Your afternoon might involve hunting, which sounds like fun until you realise that medieval royal hunting is basically warfare practice disguised as recreation. You're riding horses trained for battle, carrying weapons and chasing animals that can absolutely kill you if something goes wrong. A wild boar doesn't care that you're wearing a crown sir. It'll gore you just as happily as it would anyone else. The hunting party around you includes armed men whose job is partly to help with the hunt and partly to make sure you don't get killed by your own recreational activities. Today's hunt takes you into the forest that borders your lands, and while you're tracking deer, you're also surveying territory that might need to be defended if your neighbours decide to get aggressive. The huntmaster points out signs of poachers, which means people are desperate enough to risk death by hunting in your private forests. Your foresters report that some of the boundary markers have been moved, suggesting your neighbours might be testing how carefully you're watching your borders. What started as recreation has turned into an intelligence-gathering mission with weapons. If you're not hunting, you might be inspecting your fortifications, which means climbing around stone walls and towers to check on defensive preparations. This is actual work. You're looking for weak points in the walls, talking to your military engineers about maintenance and improvements, and making sure your castle can actually withstand a siege if necessary. Medieval warfare is a constant possibility, and your castle isn't just your home, it's a military installation that needs to function properly when people start shooting arrows at it. The afternoon inspection reveals that the North Tower needs masonry work before winter, because water has been getting into the mortar and freezing, creating cracks that could become serious structural problems. The armory needs better ventilation because the weapons are developing rust spots, and rust on a sword can mean the difference between life and death in battle. The granaries are well stocked for now, but you need to start planning for next year's harvest, because a besieged castle lives or dies based on its food supplies. Evening brings dinner, the main social event of the day, where you preside over a hall full of nobles, guests and hangers-on who are all trying to advance their own interests while appearing to honour yours. The great hall is lit by torches and candles, which sounds romantic until you realise that open flames and medieval building materials create a constant fire hazard. The air is thick with smoke, cooking smells, and the body odour of people who bathe maybe once a week, if they're fastidious about hygiene. Tonight's dinner includes entertainment that's supposed to demonstrate your cultural sophistication. There's a troubadour who's travelled from the southern kingdoms with songs that mix news, gossip and flattery in equal measure. His lyrics praise your wisdom and generosity, while subtly delivering information about political situations in distant lands. The court jester tells jokes that are funny if you understand the political references, but medieval humour often depends on knowing who's sleeping with whom, who owes money to whom, and which nobles have embarrassing secrets. The entertainment during dinner might include musicians, storytellers, or jesters, but medieval entertainment is hit or miss. The musicians might be genuinely talented, or they might be the best available option in a world where formal musical training isn't exactly common. The storytellers know their audience and will tailor their tales to flatter you and your guests, but subtle flattery gets old fast when you hear it every night. The jesters are supposed to be funny, but medieval humour doesn't always translate well, and some jokes that seemed hilarious in 1347 might just be confusing or offensive to modern sensibilities. Throughout the evening, you're managing personalities and politics with every conversation. That baron sitting to your left is loyal but broke and might need financial help soon. The bishop on your right controls significant lands and resources, but has his own agenda that doesn't always align with yours. The visiting merchant has information about trade routes and foreign markets, but he's also trying to secure exclusive trading privileges that might not be in your kingdom's best interest. Every casual conversation is actually a negotiation, and every friendly gesture might be calculated to gain some advantage. The baron mentions casually that his harvest was poor this year, which is his way of asking for tax relief without actually asking. The bishop talks about the need for a new monastery, which would increase his influence but cost you money and land. The merchant shares rumours about political instability in neighbouring kingdoms, information that's valuable but comes with the expectation that you'll remember his contribution when trade negotiations begin. You have to respond to each conversational gambit while appearing relaxed and sociable, even though every word you speak will be analysed and reported to people who weren't in the room. As the evening winds down and you finally retire to your chamber, You're exhausted in ways that have nothing to do with physical labor. You've spent the entire day making decisions that affect thousands of people, managing personalities that could destabilize your kingdom if handled poorly, and maintaining the careful balance of authority and accessibility that keeps medieval kingship functioning. Your head is full of unresolved problems, incomplete information, and the knowledge that tomorrow will bring more of the same. Getting undressed is as complicated as getting dressed was this morning, requiring the same team of servants to help you out of the layers of clothing that have been making you sweat all day, despite the cold castle air. Your body servant carefully removes each piece of clothing, checking for damage or wear that might need attention. Your chamberlain briefs you on tomorrow's schedule while you're being undressed, because privacy is still a luxury you can't really afford. Your final act before sleep is usually prayer, not just because medieval people were religious, but because running a medieval kingdom gives you plenty to pray about. You're responsible for people's lives and livelihoods in ways that modern leaders can barely imagine, and the margin for error is basically zero. You pray for wisdom in tomorrow's decisions, for the health of your people, for good weather for the crops, and for the strength to carry the weight of absolute responsibility that comes with absolute power. As you finally settle back into that uncomfortable bed with its crackling straw mattress and questionable pillows, you're acutely aware that this entire day will repeat tomorrow, and the day after that, and every day until you die or someone kills you and takes your throne. Medieval kingship isn't a job you retire from, mindtits. It's a life sentence that comes with a crown instead of shackles, but the constraints are just as real and considerably more complicated. The stone walls around you hold in the cold, the smells, and the constant pressure of being the final authority on everything that goes wrong in your kingdom. Tomorrow you'll wake up before dawn, get dressed by other people, eat food that prioritizes status over flavor, and spend another day managing medieval problems with medieval solutions, while everyone around you watches your every move and judges your every decision. It's a life of absolute power exercised under absolutely impossible conditions, where every privilege comes with a corresponding responsibility, and every luxury is balanced by a burden that most people couldn't even imagine carrying. But even as you're settling into sleep, the day's problems continue churning in your mind like a mill wheel that never stops grinding. That dispute between the villages over water rights isn't really about water. It's about two communities that have hated each other for generations, finding new excuses to fight. Your decision might prevent violence in the short term, but unless you address the underlying tensions, you'll be hearing variations of the same complaint for years to come. Medieval problems don't stay solved just because a king makes a ruling. The tax situation in the northern provinces keeps nagging at you, because you've seen this pattern before. Either the harvest really was catastrophically bad, in which case you need to provide relief to prevent starvation and potential rebellion, or your tax collectors are lying to you, in which case you need to replace them before they steal enough to fund their own private armies. Both scenarios require immediate attention, but sending investigators north takes time you don't have and resources you need for other crises. Your spymaster's report about trooper movements bothers you because the information is just vague enough to be useless, but specific enough to be worrying. Are those soldiers marching towards your border, preparing for an invasion, or are they heading away from your border to deal with some other threat? Medieval intelligence gathering is like trying to assemble a puzzle when half the pieces are missing, and the other half might be from different puzzles entirely. You make life and death decisions based on rumors, third-hand reports, and educated guesses that might be completely wrong. The marriage negotiations that your chamberlain mentioned briefly during the evening's briefing represent another category of royal headache that keeps you awake. Your daughter is reaching marriageable age, and every neighbouring kingdom with an eligible prince is suddenly interested in alliance discussions. Each potential marriage represents a different strategic advantage and a different set of risks. Marry her to the northern prince, and you gain an ally against eastern threats, but potentially antagonize the western kingdoms who are hoping for their own dynastic connections. The marriage decision isn't just about your daughter's future, it's about the future of your entire kingdom. Medieval royal marriages are military alliances disguised as romantic ceremonies, and getting it wrong can mean your grandchildren will inherit a kingdom surrounded by enemies instead of allies. But you also know that your daughter, like most medieval princesses, will have essentially no say in who becomes her husband. The weight of sacrificing her personal happiness for political necessity is another burden that comes with the crown. Your queen, sleeping beside you in the royal bed, carries her own set of responsibilities that mirror and complicate yours. She manages the household staff, oversees the castle's domestic operations, and maintains relationships with the wives of your nobles and allies. Her opinions and preferences influence everything from menu planning to diplomatic protocol, but she also has her own family connections and political loyalties that don't always align perfectly with yours. Medieval royal marriages are partnerships of necessity that may or may not include actual affection, and navigating that relationship requires constant diplomatic skill. The castle's night sounds gradually replace the day's bustle, balls guards calling out watch changes, the occasional bark of hunting dogs in the kennels, the distant sound of someone relieving themselves in a garderobe. Even at night, your castle never truly sleeps, because medieval security doesn't take breaks. There are always guards walking the walls, servants banking fires and preparing for tomorrow's needs, and stable hands checking on horses that are worth more than most people's houses. Your own sleep is frequently interrupted by messengers arriving with urgent news that can't wait for morning. A fire in one of your towns might require immediate disaster relief. A merchant caravan might have been attacked by bandits, requiring military response. A neighboring lord might have died suddenly, creating a succession crisis that could destabilize the entire region. Medieval communication is slow, but medieval crises don't wait for convenient timing. When you do manage to fall asleep, your dreams are often filled with the same anxieties that plague your waking hours. You dream about losing battles you've never fought, about making decisions that destroy your kingdom, about waking up to find your throne empty and your crown stolen. The psychological pressure of medieval kingship doesn't end when you close your eyes. It follows you into sleep and colors your dreams with scenarios of failure and catastrophe. The isolation of kingship becomes most apparent in these quiet nighttime hours when you're surrounded by people but essentially alone with your thoughts. You can't share your deepest concerns with your advisors because showing uncertainty might undermine their confidence in your leadership. You can't discuss your fears with your family because they depend on you to be strong and decisive. The loneliness of command is a medieval reality that no amount of ceremony or luxury can address. Even your chamber pot, sitting in the corner and reminding you of your basic human needs, represents the fundamental contradiction of medieval kingship. You're simultaneously the most powerful person in the kingdom and completely dependent on others for everything from getting dressed to disposing of waste. Your servants know intimate details about your body, your habits, and your daily routines, but you can never be certain of their complete loyalty, because everyone in a medieval court is looking for ways to advance their own position. The financial pressures of running a medieval kingdom also weigh on your mind during these quiet hours. Every decision you make has economic consequences that ripple through your realm in ways that are hard to predict. Granting those trading privileges to the merchant delegation might bring in valuable revenue, but it could also anger existing merchants who will retaliate by taking their business elsewhere. Funding the new monastery the bishop wants might improve your relationship with the church, but it will also require raising taxes or cutting expenses elsewhere. Medieval royal finances are basically a constantly shifting balance between income and expenses, with no safety net if you get the calculations wrong. Your kingdom's wealth comes from agriculture, trade, and taxation, all of which depend on factors largely beyond your control. Bad weather can destroy harvests, reducing both food supplies and tax revenue. Political instability can disrupt trade routes, cutting off valuable income streams. Military threats require expensive preparations that drain your treasury, even if no actual fighting occurs. The castle around you represents both your greatest asset and your greatest expense. Maintaining the fortifications, paying the garrison, feeding the household, and keeping everything functioning requires a constant flow of resources that have to come from somewhere. Every stone in the walls, every piece of timber in the roof, every meal served in the great hall represents money that could have been spent on other priorities. Medieval kings are essentially running very expensive, very complicated businesses that happen to involve crowns and swords instead of modern corporate structures. Your relationship with the church adds another layer of complexity to your nighttime worries. The bishop at dinner tonight was polite and respectful, but you know he's ultimately answerable to religious authorities who don't always support royal policies. Medieval Christianity is a political force that can either legitimize your rule or undermine it, depending on how well you manage church relationships. The monastery the bishop wants isn't just a religious institution, it's a center of learning, economic activity, and political influence that could strengthen or threaten your authority. The education of your children presents its own set of concerns that keep you awake. Your sons need to learn military skills, political strategy, and leadership techniques that will prepare them to rule after you're gone. Your daughters need to understand diplomacy, household management, and the delicate art of royal marriage negotiations. But medieval education is hit or miss, and there's no guarantee that your children will develop the skills and judgment necessary to preserve what you've built. The succession question haunts every medieval ruler, because there's no good way to ensure a smooth transition of power. Your eldest son might be brave and intelligent, but bravery and intelligence don't automatically translate into effective kingship. Your younger sons might be more capable rulers, but passing over the eldest could create family conflicts that tear your kingdom apart. The medieval world is full of examples of kingdoms that collapsed because of succession disputes, and you know your own realm isn't immune to those dangers. As dawn approaches and you prepare to face another day of identical challenges, you're acutely aware that medieval kingship is essentially a performance that you can never stop giving. Every public appearance, every decision, every conversation is watched and judged by people who have their own agendas and interpretations. You're simultaneously an actor playing the role of a king and an actual king whose performance determines the fate of thousands of people. The morning light filtering through your chamber windows signals the start of another day that will be remarkably similar to the one that just ended. You'll get dressed with help, eat food that prioritizes symbolism over taste, hear complaints and petitions that reveal the endless complexity of human nature, make decisions based on incomplete information, and try to project an image of confident authority while privately dealing with doubts and uncertainties that you can never fully share with anyone. This is the reality of medieval kingship, not the glamorous fantasy of Hollywood movies, but the grinding daily reality of absolute responsibility exercised under impossible conditions. Every crown comes with a weight that extends far beyond its physical mass, and every throne is built on a foundation of compromises, calculations, and consequences that stretch far beyond the person sitting on it. You're not just a king, you're a medieval king, which means you're playing a game where the rules are constantly changing. The stakes are always life and death, and there's no instruction manual to guide you through the complexities of ruling people who depend on you for everything from justice to survival. You're standing in your medieval kitchen in 1347, staring at a hunk of meat that's starting to turn an interesting shade of green around the edges, and you've got a problem that would make a modern chef weep. You need to make this edible, flavorful, and safe to eat, but you don't have salt. Not because you forgot to buy it, not because you're on some prehistoric keto diet, but because salt costs more than most people make in a month. And even if you could afford it, the nearest source might be a 3-week journey through bandit-infested territory, where people would literally kill you for a handful of the white crystals. Welcome to medieval cooking, where the phrase seasoned to taste means something completely different than what you're used to, and where making food flavorful without salt requires a combination of creativity, desperation, and techniques that would seem absolutely insane to anyone with access to a modern spice rack. You're about to discover that medieval cooks were basically culinary MacGyvers, turning whatever they could find, grow, steal, or trade into something that wouldn't kill you, and might even taste decent if you were lucky. The first thing you need to understand about medieval seasoning is that salt wasn't just expensive, it was geographically impossible for most people. If you lived inland, away from coastal salt works or natural salt deposits, getting salt meant relying on merchants who had to transport it over vast distances using medieval transportation technology, which is to say horses, carts, and a lot of prayer that bandits wouldn't steal your entire load. Every grain of salt that made it to your table had survived a journey that makes modern supply chain logistics look simple. So you learn to work with what's actually available, starting with herbs that you can grow yourself or forage from the surrounding countryside. Your medieval herb garden isn't a cute hobby. It's a survival necessity that might mean the difference between eating flavorful food and eating something that tastes like wet cardboard. You're growing sage, which has a strong, almost medicinal flavor that can mask the taste of meat that's seen better days. There's thyme, which grows like a weed and adds an earthy, aromatic quality that makes everything smell better than it actually is. Rosemary grows year-round in most climates and has such a powerful flavor that a little goes a very long way. But herbs are just the beginning of your salt-free seasoning arsenal. You've discovered that wood ash, when properly prepared, can add a salty flavor to food without actually containing salt. You take hardwood ash, preferably from oak or beech, soak it in water, strain out the debris, and boil down the liquid until you get a concentrated alkaline solution that tastes surprisingly salty. It's not exactly salt, and it'll give your food a slightly bitter undertone, but when you're desperate for that salty flavor, ash water becomes your best friend. The process of making ash water seasoning is labor-intensive and slightly dangerous because you're essentially making lye, which can burn your skin if you're not careful. You collect ash from fires that burned only hardwood, no pine or other resinous trees that would make the final product taste like turpentine. The ash gets soaked in clean water for several days, stirred occasionally, then strained through cloth to remove the chunks of charcoal and debris. The resulting liquid is boiled down until it's concentrated enough to add flavor without adding too much liquid to your dish. Your medieval spice cabinet relies heavily on what you can grow, preserve, and trade for locally. Garlic becomes absolutely essential because it grows easily, stores well, and has enough flavor to transform almost any dish from bland to edible. You're growing so much garlic that your entire homestead probably smells like a medieval Italian restaurant. But garlic breath is a small price to pay for food that doesn't taste like sadness. Onions serve a similar purpose and have the added advantage of making you cry, which at least proves you're still alive after eating medieval food for months on end. Wild herbs become your secret weapons against flavourless food. You're foraging for wild garlic, which grows in shaded areas and has a more subtle flavour than cultivated garlic, but can be used in much larger quantities. There's wild mint, which adds freshness to dishes that might otherwise taste like they've been buried underground for several seasons. Nettle, when properly prepared so it doesn't sting your mouth, has a spinach-like flavour and can be dried and powdered to use as a seasoning throughout the winter. The art of medieval preservation becomes intimately connected with flavouring, because anything that preserves food usually adds flavour in the process. You're smoking meat over specific types of wood that impart flavour while removing moisture that bacteria need to grow. Apple wood gives a sweet, mild flavour that works well with pork. Oak provides a stronger, more traditional smoky taste that can make even tough meat seem more appealing. The smoking process takes days and requires constant attention to maintain the right temperature and smoke levels, but the result is meat that's both preserved and flavoured. Fermentation becomes your friend in ways that modern people rarely experience. You're fermenting vegetables not just to preserve them through winter, but because the fermentation process creates new flavours that can substitute for salt in many dishes. Fermented cabbage develops a tangy, salty flavour that can season other foods. Fermented turnips become a condiment that adds complexity to simple grain dishes. The bacteria responsible for fermentation also produce acids that help preserve the food and create flavours that your medieval palate learns to crave. Vinegar production becomes essential not just for preservation but for flavouring. You're making vinegar from any fermentable material you can get your hands on: leftover bread, fruit scraps, even fermented honey if you're lucky enough to have access to beehives. The vinegar adds acidity that brightens flavours and helps preserve food, but it also adds a sharpness that can substitute for salt in many applications. A splash of strong vinegar can make bland grain porridge actually taste like something worth eating. The medieval trade in exotic spices creates a completely different category of seasoning for those lucky enough to afford it, or clever enough to acquire it through trade. Pepper, when you can get it, is worth more than its weight in silver and gets used sparingly in ways that maximize its impact. You're not dumping pepper on everything like a modern diner. You're using individual peppercorns strategically, sometimes crushing just one or two to season an entire pot of food for multiple people. Other exotic spices reach your kitchen through trade networks that stretch across continents and involve risks that would make modern importers quit their jobs. Cinnamon comes from Ceylon through Byzantine merchants who mark up the price at every stop along the trade route. Cloves arrive from the Spice Islands after journeys that might take 2 years and involve pirates, storms, and political upheavals that can disrupt supply chains for decades. When you do get access to these spices, you use them like precious metals, measuring out tiny amounts and saving them for special occasions or when you need to impress important guests. The medieval understanding of flavour combinations develops along completely different lines than modern cuisine, because you're working with entirely different ingredients and constraints. You learn that honey, when you can afford it, doesn't just sweeten food, it also helps preserve it, and adds complexity that makes other flavours more interesting. A tiny amount of honey can transform a pot of grain porridge from subsistence food into something that actually tastes good enough to look forward to eating. Mustard becomes a crucial flavouring agent because mustard seeds grow easily in most climates and can be processed into a condiment that adds heat and flavour without requiring salt. You're growing your own mustard plants, harvesting the seeds and grinding them with vinegar or other liquids to create a paste that can season everything from meat to vegetables. Medieval mustard is much stronger and more aggressive than modern versions because you're not diluting it with commercial stabilizers or mild ingredients. The use of animal fats for flavoring represents another crucial aspect of salt-free medieval cooking. When you slaughter an animal, every part gets used, including the fat, which becomes both a cooking medium and a flavoring agent. Pork fat adds richness and savory flavor that can substitute for salt in many dishes. Beef fat, when properly rendered, provides a different flavor profile that works especially well with grain-based dishes. The fat also helps preserve food and makes it more filling, which is crucial when you're doing physical labor all day and can't afford to feel hungry. Wine and ale become essential cooking ingredients when water quality is questionable and you need something to add flavor to food. You're cooking with whatever alcoholic beverages you can make, trade for, or afford, and the alcohol content helps preserve food while adding complex flavors that develop during the cooking process. A splash of ale in your grain porridge adds depth and richness that makes it much more palatable. Wine, when you can get it, transforms simple vegetable dishes into something that approaches actual cuisine. The medieval practice of using meat broths as seasoning agents develops because you can't afford to waste anything edible. Bones contain flavors that can be extracted through long, slow cooking. You're saving every bone from every meal, boiling them for hours or even days to extract every bit of flavor and nutrition. The resulting broth becomes a base for other dishes and adds umami flavors that make everything taste more satisfying and complex. Dairy products, when available, provide another category of flavoring that doesn't require salt. Fresh cheese adds richness and tang to dishes. Sour cream or cultured butter provides acidity and fat that enhances other flavors. Aged cheeses, when you can afford them or make them yourself, develop complex flavors that can transform simple grain or vegetable dishes into something that actually tastes good enough to enjoy, rather than just endure. The seasonal nature of medieval life means your flavoring options change dramatically throughout the year, and you have to adapt your cooking accordingly. Spring brings fresh herbs and early vegetables that add brightness to winter-weary palates. Summer provides an abundance of fresh produce that needs to be preserved for later use. Fall means harvesting and processing everything you'll need to survive winter. Winter forces you to rely on preserved, dried, and stored ingredients that require different cooking techniques to remain palatable. Wild ingredients become crucial supplements to your domestic flavoring arsenal. You're foraging for wild berries that can be dried and used to add sweetness and tartness to savory dishes. Wild mushrooms provide umami flavors that make everything taste more substantial and satisfying. Wild nuts can be ground into pastes that add richness and protein to grain-based dishes. The key is knowing what's safe to eat and what will kill you, because medieval foraging doesn't come with warning labels. The social aspects of medieval seasoning involve trading, sharing, and bartering for ingredients that you can't produce yourself. Your neighbor might have access to honey in exchange for some of your dried herbs. The local miller might trade grain for preserved vegetables. Medieval communities develop informal networks of ingredient sharing that help everyone eat better than they could manage on their own. But these networks also create dependencies and obligations that affect your social relationships. The preservation of flavoring agents becomes as important as preserving food itself. You're drying herbs in bundles hung from your ceiling, creating storage areas that smell like concentrated nature. Seeds get stored in containers that protect them from moisture and pests. Fermented products require ongoing maintenance to prevent spoilage. Your entire living space becomes organized around food preservation and preparation in ways that modern people can barely imagine. The medieval cook's relationship with fire and cooking methods directly affects flavoring because different cooking techniques extract and develop flavors in different ways. Roasting over an open fire creates different flavors than boiling in a pot. Slow cooking in buried pots develops different taste profiles than quick grilling over coals. You learn to match cooking methods with available seasonings to maximize flavor impact from limited ingredients. The end result of all this effort is food that tastes completely different from modern cuisine, but is often more intensely flavored because every ingredient has been carefully chosen, preserved, and combined to maximize its impact. Medieval food without salt isn't bland, it's complex in ways that modern palates, accustomed to the simple impact of sodium, often can't fully appreciate. You develop a sensitivity to subtle flavors and an appreciation for ingredient combinations that modern commercial food production has largely abandoned. Living without salt in the medieval world forces you to become a more creative, more resourceful, and more connected cook than most modern people ever need to be. Every meal becomes an exercise in making the most of what's available, and every flavor becomes precious because you've worked so hard to create it. The absence of salt doesn't make medieval food worse. It just makes it completely different, and often more interesting than anything you'll find in a modern kitchen. You're standing in the town square of Florence in 1450, clutching a piece of parchment with some scratchy Latin text on it, and you're about to face what might be the most terrifying exam of your life. Not because the material is particularly difficult, but because failing this test doesn't just mean you don't get into university. It means you might be accused of being a fraud, a liar, or possibly even a heretic who's been pretending to have skills you don't actually possess. Welcome to medieval literacy verification, where proving you can read isn't just about sounding out words, but about demonstrating that you're the kind of person who should be trusted with written information in the first place. The whole concept of proving literacy in 1450 exists because reading is simultaneously precious and dangerous. Books are rare, expensive, and potentially subversive. The ability to read means you can access ideas without having someone else filter them for you, which makes you either valuable or threatening, depending on who's asking. Your literacy test isn't just about demonstrating a skill, it's about proving you're the right kind of person to have that skill, and the people administering the test are looking for any excuse to find you wanting. Your examiner today is Brother Antonius, a Franciscan monk whose job involves determining whether people claiming to be literate actually possess the reading skills they say they have. He's seen every trick in the book, literally, because people have been trying to fake literacy for as long as literacy has been worth faking. Some people memorize common prayers and legal phrases to make it seem like they can read when they're actually just reciting from memory. Others collaborate with friends to create elaborate deceptions involving predetermined texts and rehearsed performances. The first challenge you face is that medieval literacy isn't a simple binary skill like modern reading. There are different levels and types of literacy that carry different social and legal implications. You might be able to read Latin, but not vernacular languages, or vice versa. You might be able to read religious texts, but struggle with legal documents that use different vocabulary and formatting. You might be able to read aloud, but not understand what you're reading, which is actually more common than you'd expect, because medieval education often emphasized pronunciation over comprehension. Brother Antonius starts your examination by handing you a text you've never seen before, a passage from a contemporary religious treatise that's written in formal Latin using standard ecclesiastical abbreviations. This isn't a test you can pass through memorization because the text is recent enough that it hasn't had time to become widely known, but old enough that the language and style represent established conventions rather than experimental writing. You have to prove you can decode not just the words but the abbreviations, formatting conventions, and implicit meanings that any truly literate person would understand. The Latin text is filled with abbreviations that look like random scribbles if you don't know the conventions. The word dominus might be abbreviated as DNS, with a line over it, but only if you understand that the line indicates missing letters. Christus becomes ex palais through a combination of Greek letters and Latin abbreviations that makes no sense unless you've been properly educated in clerical writing conventions. Your ability to smoothly navigate these abbreviations without hesitation demonstrates not just that you can read, but that you've had formal training in the specific type of reading that matters in 1450. As you work through the Latin passage, Brother Antonius is watching your eyes as much as listening to your voice. Truly literate people move their eyes in predictable patterns when reading, scanning ahead to understand sentence structure before speaking aloud. Fake readers tend to focus intensely on individual letters or words, and their eye movements give away the fact that they're struggling to decode rather than actually reading. The difference between someone who reads fluently and someone who's just sounding out letters is obvious to an experienced examiner, even if both people eventually produce the correct words. The complexity of medieval manuscripts adds another layer to your reading challenge. The text you're reading isn't printed in uniform letters like a modern book. It's handwritten by a scribe whose personal style affects everything from letter formation to spacing. Medieval handwriting varies dramatically between scribes, regions, and time periods. So true literacy requires the ability to adapt to different writing styles, rather than just recognizing one standardized format. Some scribes write with elaborate flourishes that make individual letters hard to distinguish, while others use cramped, economical scripts that pack maximum text into minimum space. The manuscript you're reading contains marginal notes and corrections that were added after the original text was written. These annotations use different abbreviation systems and sometimes different languages than the main text. A truly literate person needs to be able to distinguish between original text and later additions, understand the relationship between main text and marginal comments, and navigate the visual complexity of a page that might contain multiple layers of information written at different times by different people. Brother Antonius watches how you handle the physical manuscript as much as how you read the text. Medieval books are valuable objects that require careful handling, and your treatment of the manuscript reveals your familiarity with written materials. You need to know how to turn pages without damaging the parchment, how to hold the book so the binding doesn't crack, and how to position yourself so you can read clearly without blocking light or casting shadows on the text. Clumsy handling suggests you're not accustomed to working with books, which raises questions about your claimed literacy. The next phase of your test involves translating the Latin passage into vernacular Italian, which tests whether you actually understand what you're reading or whether you're just making sounds that happen to be correct. Medieval Latin education often emphasized pronunciation and memorization over comprehension. So many people could read Latin aloud without actually understanding its meaning. Your translation has to demonstrate not just vocabulary knowledge, but understanding of grammar, syntax, and the subtle theological concepts the passage discusses. The translation challenge becomes particularly difficult because medieval Latin uses grammatical structures and vocabulary that don't translate directly into vernacular languages. Latin word order is flexible in ways that Italian isn't, and Latin theological vocabulary often lacks precise vernacular equivalents. You have to demonstrate not just bilingual ability, but understanding of how different languages handle complex ideas differently. A word-for-word translation would be wrong, but a translation that's too interpretive might suggest you don't really understand the original text. Brother Antonius then hands you a legal document written in vernacular Italian, but using legal terminology and formatting that's different from religious texts. This tests your versatility as a reader and your familiarity with different types of written material. Legal documents use different abbreviation systems, different organizational structures, and different vocabulary than religious texts. Someone who's only familiar with Church Latin might struggle with legal terminology that derives from Roman law or contemporary commercial practices. The legal document is a property transfer agreement filled with technical terms and conditional clauses that require careful reading to understand properly. You have to identify the parties involved, the property being transferred, the conditions of the transfer, and the legal obligations each party is accepting. Getting any of these details wrong doesn't just demonstrate poor reading skills, it suggests you're not qualified to handle legal documents, which could affect your ability to conduct business, own property, or participate in legal proceedings. Medieval legal language is deliberately complex and precise because ambiguity in contracts can lead to expensive lawsuits or violent disputes. The document you're reading contains nested conditional clauses that modify each other in ways that completely change the meaning of individual sentences. You have to track multiple conditions, exceptions, and qualifications while maintaining understanding of the overall transaction. This type of reading requires not just literacy, but logical thinking and attention to detail that goes far beyond basic decoding skills. The formatting of legal documents follows conventions that aren't immediately obvious to casual readers. Important information might be emphasized through larger letters, special inks, or specific positioning on the page. Witness signatures and official seals have specific meanings and legal implications. You have to demonstrate understanding of these visual conventions and explain what different formatting elements indicate about the document's legal status and authenticity. Your handwriting test comes next, because in 1450, reading and writing are often considered separate skills that need to be verified independently. Brother Antonius dictates a passage that you have to write down, testing not just your spelling and letter formation, but your understanding of proper formatting and abbreviation conventions. Medieval handwriting isn't just about making legible letters. It's about following established conventions that make your writing recognizable and trustworthy to other literate people. The dictation passage includes numbers, dates, and proper names that test your ability to handle the specific challenges of medieval writing. Roman numerals have to be written correctly, using standard abbreviations. Saints' names have to be properly abbreviated and formatted. Dates have to follow ecclesiastical calendar conventions that assume knowledge of religious feast days and seasonal calculations. Your handwriting style itself sends messages about your education and social status. Sloppy letters suggest inadequate training, while overly fancy scripts might be seen as pretentious or fraudulent. Brother Antonius watches carefully as you write, looking for signs that you're genuinely familiar with writing conventions rather than just copying letters you've memorized. Authentic writers develop personal habits and shortcuts that show through in their letter formation and spacing. Forgers and fakes tend to write more carefully and uniformly than genuine writers because they're concentrating on making individual letters rather than thinking about the content they're recording. The physical act of medieval writing requires specific tools and techniques that test your practical experience with written materials. You're using a quill pen that needs to be held at the correct angle and pressure to produce clean lines without splattering ink. The ink itself has a different consistency than modern writing materials and requires different timing for drying and blotting. Medieval paper or parchment has surface textures that affect how ink flows and how letters appear. Your comfort with these materials reveals whether you've had genuine experience with writing or whether you're struggling with unfamiliar tools. The mathematical component of your literacy test reflects the fact that medieval numeracy and literacy are often connected skills. You have to demonstrate your ability to read and write numbers using both Roman numerals and the newer Arabic number system that's becoming more common in commercial contexts. This isn't just about basic arithmetic, it's about showing that you understand the different numbering systems used in different types of documents and can switch between them appropriately. Your test includes solving a word problem that's written out in text rather than presented as a mathematical equation. Medieval mathematics education emphasized practical problem solving using written descriptions rather than abstract symbolic notation. You have to read a complex scenario involving multiple transactions, calculate the results, and present your answer in the format appropriate to the type of problem. Getting the math wrong suggests you don't understand the practical applications of literacy in commercial and administrative contexts. The mathematical problems become increasingly complex, involving currency conversions, percentage calculations, and compound interest scenarios that test your understanding of commercial mathematics. Medieval commerce involves multiple currencies, different measurement systems, and complex credit arrangements that require sophisticated mathematical literacy. You have to demonstrate not just basic arithmetic, but understanding of how written numerical information relates to real-world commercial transactions. Brother Antonius presents you with accounting records from a merchant's ledger and asks you to verify the calculations and identify any discrepancies. Medieval bookkeeping uses specific formats and conventions that require literacy training beyond basic reading skills. You have to understand how debits and credits are recorded, how different types of transactions are categorized, and how seasonal variations affect annual calculations. This test reveals whether your literacy includes the practical skills needed for commercial and administrative work. The oral examination phase tests your ability to discuss and analyze texts rather than just read them mechanically. Brother Antonius asks you questions about the theological implications of the religious passage you read earlier, testing whether you understand the deeper meanings and can engage with ideas rather than just processing words. Medieval literacy is expected to enable intellectual engagement, not just mechanical decoding, and your answers reveal the depth of your education and understanding. The discussion moves to contemporary political and social issues that literate people would be expected to understand and have opinions about. Brother Antonius asks about recent papal pronouncements, political developments in Italian city-states, and theological controversies that are being debated in academic circles. Your answers demonstrate not just that you can read, but that you use your reading skills to stay informed about important issues and can think critically about complex topics. The theological discussion becomes particularly detailed because literacy in 1450 is closely connected to religious education. Brother Antonius asks you to explain the differences between various religious orders, the historical development of church doctrine, and the theological arguments behind recent papal decisions. Your answers need to demonstrate not just knowledge of facts, but understanding of how different ideas relate to each other and how religious thinking has evolved over time. The political analysis tests your understanding of the complex relationships between different Italian city-states, the Holy Roman Empire, and various foreign powers that influence local politics. You have to demonstrate knowledge of recent treaties, trade agreements, and military alliances, while showing understanding of how these formal arrangements affect daily life in Florence. Medieval literacy includes staying informed about political developments that could affect economic opportunities, legal obligations, and personal safety. The social verification component of your test involves questions about your background, education, and reasons for needing literacy verification. Brother Antonius wants to understand who taught you to read, where you learned, and why you need official recognition of your skills. Medieval literacy education happens through specific channels, church schools, private tutors, guild apprenticeships, or family instruction, and your story needs to make sense within these established pathways. Your answers about your educational background get cross-referenced against Brother Antonius's knowledge of local schools, teachers, and educational practices. If you claim to have learned to read from a particular teacher, he might ask detailed questions about that person's methods, personality, or other students. Medieval communities are small enough that educational claims can often be verified through personal knowledge or connections, and false claims are easily exposed. The family background investigation becomes particularly thorough because literacy often runs in families through both genetic advantages and educational opportunities. Brother Antonius asks about your parents' literacy, your siblings' education, and your family's economic status during your childhood. Children from literate families have advantages in learning to read that children from illiterate families don't share, and your educational story needs to account for these realities convincingly. The questioning about your reasons for seeking literacy certification reveals the practical implications of your claimed skills. Are you applying for a position that requires reading and writing? Do you need to handle legal documents for business purposes? Are you planning to enter religious life where literacy is essential? Your motivations need to make sense given your background and circumstances, and Brother Antonius is looking for inconsistencies that might suggest fraud or deception. The final challenge involves demonstrating your ability to teach reading to someone else, which tests whether your literacy is deep enough to be transmitted rather than just possessed. Brother Antonius brings in a young apprentice who knows his letters but struggles with more complex texts. You have to guide the apprentice through reading a simple passage, explaining not just what the words say, but how to approach unfamiliar words, abbreviations, and concepts. Your teaching demonstration reveals whether you understand reading as a systematic skill that can be broken down and explained, or whether you're just going through motions you've memorized without really understanding the underlying processes. Medieval pedagogy emphasizes the ability to pass knowledge to others as proof that you truly possess that knowledge yourself. Someone who can read but can't teach reading is considered to have incomplete mastery of the skill. The apprentice deliberately makes mistakes during your teaching session to test how you respond to errors and confusion. Do you get frustrated and impatient, suggesting you don't really understand the learning process? Do you have strategies for helping someone work through difficult passages? Can you explain the logic behind abbreviation systems and formatting conventions? Your responses demonstrate not just literacy, but the kind of mature understanding that qualifies you to be trusted with important written responsibilities. The teaching exercise becomes more complex as Brother Antonius asks you to help the apprentice understand not just individual words, but the relationships between ideas in a text. Medieval literacy education emphasizes comprehension and analysis rather than just mechanical decoding. You have to demonstrate your ability to break down complex sentences, explain grammatical relationships, and help someone else develop the thinking skills that accompany true literacy. The pedagogical challenge extends to helping the apprentice understand the cultural and historical context that makes medieval text meaningful. References to classical authors, historical events, and contemporary political situations require background knowledge that goes far beyond basic reading skills. Your ability to provide this context and help someone else develop cultural literacy demonstrates the depth and breadth of your own education. Brother Antonius observes your teaching style as much as your teaching content. Medieval educational theory emphasizes patience, encouragement, and systematic instruction that builds confidence while developing skills. Your approach to helping the apprentice reveals your understanding of how learning happens and whether you have the temperament needed for positions that involve training others or supervising written work. The examination concludes with a discussion of the social and legal responsibilities that come with certified literacy. Brother Antonius explains that literate people are expected to serve as witnesses for important documents, help neighbours understand contracts and legal notices, and maintain accurate records for business and community purposes. Your literacy certification creates obligations as well as opportunities, and you need to demonstrate understanding of these responsibilities. The legal implications of literacy certification include potential liability for mistakes in documents you help create or interpret. If you serve as a witness to a contract and later it's discovered that you misread or misunderstood crucial terms, you could be held legally responsible for resulting damages. Medieval law assumes that people who claim literacy skills are competent to handle written materials, and certification creates legal presumptions about your abilities and responsibilities. The social expectations accompanying literacy include serving as an informal advisor and helper for neighbours who can't read themselves. Literate people are expected to read important letters, explain legal documents, and help with written communication when needed. These obligations aren't legally enforced, but they're socially expected, and refusing to help when asked could damage your reputation and social standing in the community. The economic implications of literacy certification affect your employment opportunities, business prospects, and social mobility. Many positions in medieval society require reading and writing skills, and certification opens doors that remain closed to illiterate people. However, certification also creates expectations about your performance and reliability that could become problematic if your skills aren't as strong as your credentials suggest. Brother Antonius's final decision about your literacy status depends not just on your technical skills, but on his assessment of your character, reliability, and social standing. Medieval literacy certification is as much about trust as it is about ability. You might be able to read perfectly, but still fail the examination if the examiner decides you're not the kind of person who should be trusted with access to written information and the social responsibilities that come with it. The character assessment includes evaluation of your honesty during the examination process. Have you been truthful about your background and education? Have you tried to exaggerate your skills or minimize your limitations? Medieval society places enormous emphasis on honesty and reliability, and evidence of deception during the literacy examination could disqualify you regardless of your actual reading abilities. The social standing evaluation considers your family background, economic status, and community reputation. Literacy certification carries prestige and opens opportunities, but it also requires social respectability that not everyone possesses. Someone from a disreputable family or with a history of legal problems might be denied certification even if their reading skills are adequate, because literacy certification implies trustworthiness and social reliability. The reliability assessment focuses on whether you're likely to fulfill the obligations that come with literacy certification. Are you responsible enough to handle important documents carefully? Can you be trusted to give accurate advice about written materials? Do you have the judgment needed to know when a situation requires expertise beyond your abilities? These character traits matter as much as technical skills for medieval literacy certification. Walking away from your examination, whether successful or not, you realize that proving literacy in 1450 involves much more than just demonstrating reading skills. It's about proving you're educated, trustworthy, socially responsible, and intellectually mature enough to handle the power that comes with the ability to access and interpret written information independently. Medieval literacy isn't just a skill myth, it's a social status that comes with obligations and expectations that extend far beyond the simple ability to decode written words. The implications of your examination results will affect not just your immediate opportunities, but your long-term social and economic prospects. Successful certification opens doors to positions in administration, commerce, education, and religious life that remain closed to illiterate people. Failed certification, however, doesn't just mean you can't pursue these opportunities. It might also raise questions about your honesty and competence that could affect your reputation in other areas. The medieval understanding of literacy as a combination of technical skill, cultural knowledge, social responsibility, and moral character reflects a world where written information is scarce and valuable. Every literate person represents an investment of time, resources, and trust that society expects to be repaid through responsible use of reading and writing abilities. Your literacy examination isn't just about what you can do, it's about who you are and whether you deserve to be trusted with the power that literacy represents in medieval society. You wake up before dawn in a cramped room above a bakery near the Rialto Bridge, and the first thing that hits you isn't the smell of fresh bread from below. It's the overwhelming stench of Venice itself, seeping through your shutters like some kind of medieval alarm clock designed by someone who hates humanity. You're a street sweeper in the most powerful maritime republic in the world, which sounds almost dignified until you realize that sweeping streets in Venice doesn't just mean dealing with normal garbage and horse manure. You're dealing with a city that's literally sinking into a lagoon while simultaneously trying to maintain the illusion that it's the most sophisticated place on earth. Your job title is Spazzino, which translates roughly to the person who deals with everything nobody else wants to touch. And in Venice, that covers a lot more territory than you might expect. You're not just sweeping up yesterday's trash. You're managing the daily reality of a city built on wooden pilings in salt water, where high tide regularly floods the streets and low tide reveals things that should have stayed hidden forever. Venice is beautiful from a distance, but up close, at street level, with a broom in your hands, it's a constant battle against entropy, decay, and the fundamental impossibility of keeping anything clean in a place where the sewage system is basically throw it in the canal and hope the tide takes it away. The first challenge of your day is getting dressed in clothes that can handle what you're about to encounter. Your work outfit isn't a uniform, it's armor against the various liquids, semi-liquids, and unidentifiable substances that make up the daily reality of Venetian streets. You're wearing a thick wool tunic that's been soaked in so many different types of filth that it's developed its own ecosystem, wool hose that are more patches than original fabric, and wooden clogs that raise you slightly above the worst of whatever you're walking through. Your tools are simple but essential. A broom made from bundled twigs that gets replaced weekly, because Venice destroys brooms faster than most cities destroy soldiers. A wooden shovel for the heavier work, a leather bucket for collecting things that are too disgusting to leave lying around, and a long stick with a hook on the end for fishing items out of canals when absolutely necessary. You also carry a small knife, not for protection, but for cutting apart various objects that have become tangled together in ways that defy natural explanation. The morning routine starts with checking your assigned territory, which covers about 6 blocks of narrow streets, 3 small squares, and 2 bridges near the market district. Venice is divided into cleaning territories, the way military campaigns are divided into battle zones, because cleaning Venice is essentially urban warfare against an enemy that never stops attacking. Your territory includes some of the busiest commercial areas in the city, which means you're dealing not just with residential waste, but with the debris from international trade, tourism, and the constant flow of merchants, sailors, and visitors who treat Venice like their personal garbage disposal. Your first stop is the area around the fish market, where yesterday's unsold catch has been contributing to the city's aroma overnight. The fish vendors are supposed to dispose of their own waste, but supposed to and actually do are two very different things in medieval Venice. You're scraping fish scales, fish heads, and various fish parts from the pavement while trying not to think too hard about what the dark liquid pooling around your feet might be. The smell is so intense that you've developed the ability to breathe exclusively through your mouth, which helps with the odor but means you can taste everything you're smelling. The fish market cleanup reveals one of the fundamental challenges of your job, distinguishing between trash that should be removed and items that someone might still want. That pile of fish entrails might be garbage, or it might be someone's dinner ingredients. Those empty crates might be trash, or they might belong to a merchant who's planning to use them later. Medieval property rights are complex and violently enforced, so removing the wrong item could result in anything from angry confrontations to actual lawsuits. After the fish market, you move to the areas around the various workshops and artisan shops that line the narrow streets. Venice is a manufacturing centre as well as a trading hub, so you're dealing with industrial waste from glass blowing, metal working, textile production, and countless other crafts. The glass blowers produce sharp fragments that can cut through your shoes if you're not careful. The metal workers leave behind metal filings and chemical residues that turn interesting colours when they mix with rainwater. The textile workers contribute threads, fabric scraps, and dyes that stain everything they touch in colours that don't exist in nature. The industrial waste creates a daily puzzle of determining what's safe to handle and what might kill you if you touch it wrong. Medieval industrial safety regulations basically don't exist, so workshops dump whatever they want wherever they want, and it becomes your problem to figure out how to clean it up without poisoning yourself. You've learned to identify different types of waste by smell, colour, and texture, developing an expertise in medieval chemistry that would be impressive if it weren't so disgusting. The residential areas present their own unique challenges because Venetian houses are built vertically to maximise space on expensive land, which means waste gets thrown out of upper story windows with varying degrees of accuracy regarding where it lands. You're constantly dodging falling objects while trying to clean up the results of previous failed disposal attempts. The narrow streets mean that anything thrown from a window has a good chance of hitting a building on the other side, creating archaeological layers of waste that build up in corners and doorways. The morning's work is interrupted regularly by high tide, which floods the lower-lying streets and squares with canal water that's carrying its own contribution to Venice's waste management challenges. When the tide comes in, you can't really sweep a pinch. You can only watch as everything you've cleaned gets mixed together with salt water, sewage, and whatever the canals have collected from other parts of the city. When the tide goes out, you start over with a new combination of familiar garbage and mysterious items that the water has deposited from unknown sources. The tidal flooding means that your work schedule is determined not just by human activity, but by natural forces that don't care about your cleaning plans. You learn to work quickly during low tide and find other tasks during high tide, developing a rhythm that matches the lagoon's natural cycles. The tide schedule becomes as important to your daily routine as sunrise and sunset, and you develop an instinctive ability to predict when the water will reach levels that make street cleaning impossible. Between tidal cycles, you deal with the ongoing challenge of Venice's animal population, which includes not just the usual medieval mix of horses, pigs, chickens, and dogs, but also the rats, cats, and seabirds that thrive in a maritime environment. The rats in Venice are particularly impressive because they've adapted to the tidal environment and can swim between buildings when necessary. Cleaning up after animals that can travel by water as well as land requires strategies that mainland street sweepers never need to develop. The cats of Venice are supposedly helpful for controlling the rat population, but they also contribute their own waste management challenges and have a tendency to knock things over, scatter garbage, and generally make your job more complicated. The seabirds are even worse because they can reach areas that land animals can't, and seabird droppings have a consistency and persistence that makes them particularly challenging to remove from stone surfaces. Your midday break, when you can manage to take one, usually happens in one of the small squares where you can sit on the edge of a well or the steps of a church and eat whatever food you've managed to afford. Lunch for a Venetian street sweeper typically consists of bread, cheese when you can afford it, and whatever vegetables are cheap at the market. You eat quickly because taking too long for breaks means the garbage accumulates faster than you can handle it, and falling behind on your cleaning schedule creates problems that compound throughout the day. The afternoon brings different challenges as the business day reaches its peak and the streets fill with merchants, customers, tourists, and locals going about their daily activities. Cleaning around active commerce requires diplomatic skills as much as physical labor, because you need to work around people who are trying to conduct business, make sales, and navigate the crowded streets. Merchants don't want a street sweeper disrupting their customers, but they also don't want garbage piling up around their shops. The afternoon also brings increased conflict with other people who make their living from the streets. There are scavengers who collect items that might have resale value, beggars who compete for the best locations, and various vendors who set up temporary stalls wherever they can find space. Your cleaning activities sometimes interfere with these other street-level economic activities, creating tensions that require careful management to avoid escalating into actual conflicts. The international character of Venice means you're dealing with waste and debris from people who come from completely different cultural backgrounds and have different ideas about cleanliness, waste disposal, and public behavior. German merchants might have different standards than Byzantine traders, who might have different expectations than African visitors. What one culture considers normal waste disposal might be completely unacceptable to another culture, and you're caught in the middle trying to maintain some kind of universal standard of cleanliness. The late afternoon brings the challenge of dealing with the day's commercial waste as shops and workshops close down and dispose of whatever they don't want to store overnight. This is when you encounter the largest volumes of garbage, but also when you might find items of actual value that have been discarded by mistake or thrown away by people who don't realize their worth. Finding valuable items in the trash is one of the few perks of street sweeping, but it also requires expertise in recognizing what's valuable and what just looks valuable. The evening cleanup focuses on the areas around taverns, inns, and eating establishments that have been serving customers throughout the day. Food waste presents its own challenges because it attracts animals, spoils quickly in warm weather, and can become genuinely dangerous if it sits around too long. You're dealing with leftover food, cooking grease, broken dishes, and various liquids that have been spilled throughout the day. The tavern areas also require dealing with the results of excessive drinking, which in medieval Venice can include not just the obvious bodily fluids, but also broken furniture, scattered coins, lost personal items, and sometimes unconscious customers who need to be moved before you can clean around them. Venice's position as an international trading centre means the taverns serve people from all over the world, and drunk people from different cultures express their intoxication in different ways. As darkness falls, Your work shifts to the areas around the churches and religious institutions that provide services throughout the evening. Churches generate their own types of waste, including used candles, flower offerings that have wilted, and various religious items that need to be disposed of respectfully, rather than just swept into the canal. The religious waste requires different handling, because improperly disposing of blessed objects or religious materials could create spiritual as well as practical problems. The evening also brings increased personal safety concerns, because Venice's narrow streets and complex layout make it easy for criminals to operate under cover of darkness. As a street sweeper, you're carrying tools that could be used as weapons, but you're also obviously not wealthy enough to be worth robbing for money. However, you do know the streets better than most people, which makes you valuable to criminals who need local knowledge, and potentially dangerous to criminals who don't want witnesses to their activities. The night shift continues with cleaning around the areas where Venice's less respectable businesses operate. Prostitution is legal and regulated in Venice, but it still generates waste and debris that needs to be cleaned up. Gambling establishments produce their own unique combination of waste materials. Various black market activities leave behind evidence that you need to clean up without asking too many questions about what might have happened. Working at night also means dealing with the different waste patterns that emerge when most respectable citizens are indoors. The people who are active on the streets after dark have different disposal habits and different standards of behavior than daytime users of public spaces. Night waste tends to be more liquid, more organic, and more likely to contain substances that you don't want to identify too specifically. The canal side cleanup presents ongoing challenges because Venice's unique geography means that high tide doesn't just bring water, it brings whatever the water has collected from other parts of the city and the lagoon beyond. You're fishing out objects that might have originated anywhere in the Venetian Republic, carried by currents and tides through the complex network of canals that connect every part of the city to every other part. Canal cleanup also requires understanding the complex ecology of Venice's waterways, which support not just transportation and commerce, but also fishing, manufacturing, and waste disposal for hundreds of thousands of people. The canals are simultaneously Venice's highways, its industrial infrastructure, its sewage system, and its food source, which creates environmental challenges that make your job significantly more complicated than street sweeping in a normal city. The most challenging aspect of canal side work is dealing with items that have fallen in accidentally versus items that have been dumped deliberately. Valuable objects that fall into canals need to be retrieved if possible, but determining what's valuable and what's garbage requires expertise in Venetian commerce, fashion, and material culture. A piece of fabric might be worthless scraps, or it might be expensive silk that someone dropped by mistake. Your relationship with the city's official waste management system is complicated because Venice has elaborate regulations about waste disposal, but enforcement is inconsistent, and the regulations themselves sometimes contradict each other. Different districts have different rules, different officials have different priorities, and different social classes follow different standards. As a street sweeper, you're expected to enforce cleanliness standards that not everyone agrees with, and that change depending on political and economic circumstances. The social hierarchy of waste management in Venice reflects the city's complex class structure and international character. Wealthy merchants can afford to have their waste disposed of privately and according to their own standards. Middle-class artisans and shopkeepers follow guild regulations that vary by profession. Working-class residents make do with whatever disposal options are available and affordable. Visitors and sailors follow the rules of their own cultures, which may not match Venetian expectations. Your position as a street sweeper places you at the bottom of this hierarchy, but also gives you unique insights into how the entire system works. You see the waste patterns of every social class, every profession, and every cultural group that uses Venice's public spaces. This knowledge makes you valuable to various people who need information about the city's daily rhythms, but it also makes you potentially dangerous to people who prefer that their activities remain private. The economic aspects of street sweeping in Venice are more complex than simple wage labour, because you're working in a city where everything has value and nothing is ever completely worthless. Your official salary is paid by the city government, but you also earn money from selling items you find in the garbage, from providing informal services to merchants and residents, and from various side activities that take advantage of your unique access to the city's waste streams. The informal economy of street sweeping includes selling metal scraps to smiths, fabric scraps to textile workers, and organic waste to farmers on the mainland who need fertilizer for their crops. You develop relationships with various craftspeople and merchants who buy specific types of waste materials, creating a secondary market that turns garbage into income. This informal economy requires expertise in materials, markets, and negotiation that goes far beyond simple cleaning skills. The seasonal variations in your work reflect Venice's position as both a commercial hub and a tourist destination. Summer brings increased international trade, more tourists, and higher temperatures that make organic waste more challenging to handle. Winter brings different types of waste, fewer visitors, and weather conditions that affect both the types of garbage generated and the techniques needed to clean it up effectively. The seasonal changes also affect the types of valuable items that end up in the waste stream. Tourist season brings opportunities to find lost jewelry, coins, and luxury items that visitors drop or discard. Trading season brings waste materials from international commerce that might have value to local craftspeople. Religious festivals generate specific types of waste that follow predictable patterns and create temporary opportunities for additional income. Your daily routine is punctuated by interactions with the various other people who make their living from Venice's streets and public spaces. Water carriers need clean areas to set up their operations. Street vendors need waste-free spaces to display their goods. Performers need clean stages for their acts. Your cleaning activities either support or interfere with these other economic activities, requiring ongoing negotiation and cooperation to avoid conflicts. The social aspects of street sweeping include serving as an informal information source for residents and visitors who need local knowledge. You know which areas flood at high tide, where the best merchants set up their stalls, which streets are safe to travel at night, and countless other details about daily life in Venice. This knowledge makes you valuable to people who need practical information, but sharing information also requires discretion and judgment about what's safe to reveal to whom. Your work also involves you in the city's informal dispute resolution system, because many conflicts between neighbours, merchants, and other street users centre around waste disposal, cleanliness standards, and use of public spaces. As someone who works in these spaces daily, you often witness disputes and sometimes get asked to provide testimony or opinions about what actually happened. This informal legal role requires diplomatic skills and understanding of Venice's complex social and legal systems. The health challenges of street sweeping in Venice go beyond the obvious problems of working with garbage and waste. The city's unique environment creates specific health risks, including exposure to salt air that corrodes everything it touches, standing water that breeds disease-carrying insects, and industrial chemicals that combine in unpredictable ways. You develop immunity to many common illnesses through constant exposure, but you also face occupational hazards that other workers never encounter. The psychological aspects of your job include dealing with the constant evidence of human waste, excess, and carelessness that accumulates in public spaces. You see the dark side of Venice's prosperity and sophistication every day, and maintaining mental health requires developing philosophical perspectives on human nature, social responsibility, and the meaning of work that most people never need to consider. As your shift ends and you return to your small room above the bakery, you're exhausted in ways that go beyond physical fatigue. You've spent the day managing the intersection between Venice's public image as a sophisticated commercial republic and the messy reality of thousands of people living, working, and visiting in a small space, built on unstable foundations in salt water. Your work makes the city's prosperity and beauty possible, but it also gives you intimate knowledge of the costs and contradictions that underlie Venice's success. Washing yourself at the end of the day requires careful attention because Venice's water sources are all potentially contaminated by the same waste streams you've been cleaning all day. You use water sparingly and soap when you can afford it, but complete cleanliness is impossible when you live and work in a city where waste and beauty are separated by inches rather than miles. Your personal hygiene is always a compromise between what's ideal and what's practical in an environment where clean water is expensive and perfect. Cleanliness is impossible. The evening hours provide time to maintain your tools, plan tomorrow's work, and participate in the informal social networks that connect Venice's working-class residents. Other street sweepers share information about effective techniques, valuable finds, and changes in city regulations that affect your work. These social connections provide both practical support and emotional resilience that help you cope with the challenges of your job. Your perspective on Venice is unique because you see the city from ground level, literally and figuratively. While merchants focus on profits, politicians focus on power, and tourists focus on beauty, you focus on the daily reality of keeping the city functional despite the fundamental impossibility of maintaining cleanliness in a place that's simultaneously sinking and floating. Your work is essential to Venice's success, but it's also a constant reminder of the fragility and artificiality of urban civilization in an environment that's fundamentally hostile to human habitation.